A Qatari gas tanker is burning in the Strait of Hormuz, its engine room on fire, its crew already off the ship. The hull left drifting because it's too close to detonation for anyone to climb aboard and fight the flames. That is how the ceasefire between the United States and Iran ended, not with a signature, not with a walkout at a negotiating table, but with a liquefied natural gas carrier lit up in the most important stretch of water on the planet, and nobody in Tehran willing to say out loud who pulled the trigger. And here is the part that should make you sit forward. Everyone assumed that once Washington hit back, Iran would fold. The thumbnails said panic. The early takes said Tehran was cornered. That is not what happened. Within a day, Iran was firing missiles and drones at 85 American military sites across the Gulf and telling the world it was ready for more. So the question underneath this whole story isn't who fired first, it's who actually blinked. Hold on to that, because it changes what you think you're watching. It's the 8th of July. 2 days ago, the streets of Tehran were packed, shoulder to shoulder, as the coffins of the old supreme leader moved toward the Azadi Tower, a funeral that was supposed to buy everyone a pause. Trump had even said, in his own words, that Iran was getting a week off while the country mourned. That week lasted about 72 hours. This is Professor Alex, and if you want the money underneath the missiles, the barrel price, the insurance premium, the number that actually reaches your wallet, subscribe, because the headline here is the fire, but the story is the oil. Let's get into it. Start with the ship, because the ship tells you everything about how this game is really played. The vessel was a Qatari-owned LNG carrier moving south, hugging the Omani coast, trying to slip through the strait along the safest line it could find. It was struck on its port side by a projectile. The fire took hold in the engine room. Distress signals went out. And for hours, the danger wasn't that the ship would sink, it was that it would explode. A second vessel, a Saudi-flagged Crude supertanker, one of the biggest classes of ship that sails, was hit in the same window. Then a third. 3 tankers struck by projectiles in a single day, the heaviest day of attacks in that waterway since late April. Iran's state television floated the idea that the ships had been warned to use Iran's designated channel and ignored it. Qatar came right out and blamed Tehran. And yet no Iranian official put their name on it. That silence is not confusion. That silence is the strategy. Because this is how you squeeze a choke point without technically closing it. You don't announce a blockade. You don't declare war on shipping. You let one tanker burn, you let the footage circulate, and you let every ship owner, every insurer, every captain on Earth draw the obvious conclusion on their own. The message writes itself. Come through here, and this could be you. Now put yourself in the shoes of the people who move oil for a living. Before this war started back in late February, something close to a fifth of the world's oil and gas passed through that one narrow gap between Iran and Oman every single day. 20% of the fuel that runs the global economy funneled through a lane in some places barely wide enough to matter. When the shooting began, traffic through the strait didn't slow down, it collapsed. At the worst of it, you had a handful of tankers a day creeping through a route that used to carry well over 100. And the ones that did go paid for the privilege. At one point during the war, vessels were reportedly handing Iran as much as $2 million per ship just to be allowed through. Think about what that actually is. That's not a toll. That's a hostage fee for the world's energy supply, collected one tanker at a time. For a few weeks, all of that looked like it was ending. That's the piece most people missed, and it's the piece that makes this week land the way it does. Back in the spring, Iran and the United States signed a memorandum, an interim deal, a framework, a way to stop the bleeding and start talking about a real end to the war. As part of that arrangement, Washington did something it almost never does. It handed Iran a 60-day waiver on oil sanctions, a permission slip that let Tehran actually sell its crude on the open market again. Iranian barrels started finding buyers. The strait started slowly to breathe. And the oil market, which had gone half insane earlier in the year, began to calm down. Traders started pricing in peace. They started pricing in a glut, even. But OPEC and its partners were opening the taps. Middle Eastern producers were racing to ramp output back up. And the smart money was betting that by late this year, the world would be swimming in oil, not starving for it. That is why, right before this week, Brent crude, the global benchmark, the number that sets the price of nearly everything that burns, had drifted all the way back down towards $70 a barrel. $70. After everything. After a war that had, at its peak, shoved that same barrel clean through $100 for the first time in 4 years, in what turned out to be the single largest monthly jump in oil prices ever recorded. The market had talked itself all the way back down from catastrophe to complacency. $70 was the sound of a world that had decided the worst was behind it. And then a tanker caught fire, and that whole story came apart in about a day and a half. Here's the sequence, because the order matters. The ships get hit Monday night into Tuesday. The very same day, Washington reaches for the one lever that hurts Tehran without firing a shot. It revokes that oil waiver. Gone. Effective immediately, with a hard deadline to wind down any sales within days. In one stroke, millions of barrels of Iranian crude that had finally found a home are orphaned again, with nowhere legal to go. That's not symbolic. That is the United States reaching into Iran's single most important revenue stream and turning off the tap, as punishment, in real time. But Washington didn't stop at the money. Central Command announced a wave of strikes inside Iran, more than 80 targets, hit by Air Force jets and Navy aircraft, in what one official described as bigger than anything the U.S. had thrown at Iran in the earlier rounds of this fight. And the man who ordered it wasn't in the Situation Room in Washington. He was in Ankara. That detail is easy to skate past, so slow down on it. Trump approved this strike package from Turkey in the middle of a NATO summit, pulling his Secretary of State, his Defense Secretary, his Treasury Secretary, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs into a room between meetings with Allied leaders to sign off on hitting Iran. Picture the split screen. On one side, the alliance photo op, the handshakes with the NATO chief, the speeches about burden sharing in Ukraine. On the other, a live decision to bomb more than 80 sites in a country the U.S. had signed a peace framework with just weeks earlier. Standing next to the NATO Secretary General, Trump said the quiet part flat out. As far as he was concerned, he said, the ceasefire was over. A waste of time. He said he didn't want to deal with them anymore. And then he went further. The U.S., he said, hadn't even hit Iran at the highest level yet. It could take out the power plants, the desalination plants, the things that keep the lights on and the water running for ordinary Iranians. He said he didn't want to. He also said, if we have to, we'll take them out. So that's the American side of the ledger, the oil weapon and the airstrike back to back inside a single day. And this is exactly the moment the story was supposed to end with Tehran on its heels. New supreme leader barely installed, the old one killed in the war, his son now holding the title while the country is still literally burying the father. A funeral procession still moving through the streets, an economy strangled. That's the setup for a capitulation. It didn't come. Instead, Iran's Revolutionary Guard answered the American strikes by launching missiles and drones at U.S. bases across the Gulf. The hosting countries, Kuwait and Bahrain, the places where American power in the region physically sits. Tehran said it had gone after 85 U.S. military sites. 80-plus targets hit them. They claimed 85 back. That's not the arithmetic of a nation in panic. That's a nation matching blow for blow and making sure the scoreboard is public. And an advisor to the new supreme leader put words to it, saying plainly that they expect Trump to attack again and that Iran is fully prepared for it. Read that again. Not we seek calm. Not we want to return to talks. Fully prepared. Come ahead. And understand why that response was almost inevitable, because it's tied to the funeral you saw in the streets. The man who ran Iran for decades is dead, killed in this war, and his son has just inherited the title while the country is still in mourning. A brand new supreme leader, untested, watched by every faction inside the regime that might prefer someone else in the chair. Now imagine that man's first real test on the world stage is an American president publicly humiliating him, tearing up the deal, revoking the oil money, bombing 80 sites, while the father isn't even in the ground. There is no version of Iranian politics where a leader in that position responds by going quiet. To survive at home, he has to answer. The hardliners in the Revolutionary Guard would eat a supreme leader who absorbed that and did nothing. So what looks from the outside like reckless escalation is, from the inside, a man fighting for his own authority in the most dangerous week of his life. That makes him more unpredictable, not less. A secure leader can afford restraint. A new one, surrounded by rivals, with his legitimacy on the line, often can't. So who blinked? Look honestly at the exchange and the answer is uncomfortable, because nobody did. Both sides doubled. And when neither party in a confrontation over the world's most important waterway is willing to be the one who backs down, you are no longer looking at a crisis that resolves itself. You're looking at a machine that keeps running until something breaks. That's the thing the panic framing gets exactly backwards. The danger here isn't that one side is cornered and desperate. The danger is that neither side feels cornered enough to stop. Let that sit for a second, and then follow the money, because this is where it reaches you. The moment those tankers were hit, Brent stopped falling. On Tuesday, it settled about 3% higher, back up over $74 a barrel. And by Wednesday, as the strikes and the counterstrikes stacked up and Trump stood in Ankara calling the ceasefire dead, it jumped again, roughly 5%, up toward $78. In 2 days, the market erased weeks of careful optimism. That $8 swing might not sound like the end of the world. It isn't, yet. What it is the sound of the risk premium coming back. You could watch it happen in real time in the way the desks talked about it. The analysts who'd spent June writing notes about a coming oil surplus suddenly caught flat-footed, scrambling to put the geopolitical premium back into their models. The whole market had leaned one direction, betting on glut, betting on calm, and a single ship on fire forced the entire crowd to lean back the other way at once. That's what makes moves like this violent, even when the raw numbers look modest. It's not the $8, it's the fact that almost everyone was positioned for the opposite. For weeks, traders had priced Hormuz as a solved problem. Now they're pricing it as a live one again. And the way that premium behaves from here depends entirely on a question no one in Ankara or Tehran can answer. Does this stay a tit for tat? Or does it become the second act of the war? Because we have already seen what the full version looks like, and it is not $78. When this strait genuinely seized up in the spring, Brent didn't nudge, it detonated. Past $100 a barrel, the largest monthly price increase in the history of the oil market. The people who watch this for a living warned that a sustained closure could push prices toward levels that would add close to a full percentage point to global inflation all by themselves. And this isn't abstract. In the worst stretch of the war, American drivers watched pump prices climb by more than $1 a gallon. Jet fuel in North America nearly doubled. The Postal Service, the delivery companies, all of them slapped on fuel surcharges. That is what a strait under attack does. It reaches off the map and into the price of getting a package to your door. Now hold that against the calendar, because the calendar is the part almost nobody is saying out loud. It is July of an election year. The midterms are on the 3rd of November, and there is nothing a sitting president wants less, 4 months before voters decide control of Congress, than gasoline prices marching up a sign on every corner in the country. Cheap fuel is a political asset. Expensive fuel is a political wound that voters feel every single week. So you have an American president who has every incentive in the world to keep this contained, to keep oil low, to not let Hormuz become a headline that follows people to the pump, and who just, in the same breath, tore up the ceasefire and threatened to bomb Iran's power grid. Those two impulses cannot both win. One of them is going to give. And on the other side of the water sits a mirror image problem. The people running Iran's military need the money that sanctions relief was supposed to bring. That oil waiver Washington just ripped up, that was the cash. That was the whole point of signing the memorandum in the first place. So Tehran's calculation is its own kind of trap. The more it squeezes the strait to show strength, the more it invites the strikes and the sanctions that choke off the very revenue it's fighting to unlock. Both capitals want the same thing in the end, a strait that flows and a price that's stable. And both of them keep doing the exact things that make it flow less and cost more. That's not a misunderstanding. That's two governments each convinced the other will flinch first. There's a piece of this that flips the whole picture on its head, and it's worth saying because it explains why nobody is truly desperate to end it. In a normal energy shock, everyone loses. In this one, some players quietly win. The United States is not the importer it used to be. It's one of the largest oil and gas producers on Earth. So when Hormuz burns and prices spike, American producers sell into a higher market, American export revenue climbs, and the pain lands hardest on the countries that actually depend on Gulf oil moving through that strait. And who are those countries? Overwhelmingly, they're in Asia. The vast majority of the crude that flows through Hormuz was heading east, to China, to India, to Japan, to South Korea. Europe leans on Qatar, through this same strait, for a real slice of its gas. And that's the detail hiding in plain sight about which ship they chose to burn. It wasn't a crude tanker. It was an LNG carrier, Qatari gas, the exact cargo Europe counts on to keep homes warm through winter. Qatar sits at the top of the Gulf with essentially one road out to its customers, and that road runs through Hormuz. There's no pipeline workaround for Qatari gas the way there is for some Saudi crude. If the strait becomes too dangerous for LNG carriers to run it, that supply doesn't get rerouted, it simply stops. Which means a projectile fired at one gas tanker off Oman is, in a very real sense, a hand placed on the thermostat of an entire continent. So a fire off the coast of Oman isn't just a Middle East story. It's a tax on Asian factories and European heating bills, collected by everyone who sells oil that doesn't have to pass through that gap. That asymmetry is the ugly logic humming underneath all of it. The country with the most military power to calm the strait also has the least economic reason to rush. Which brings us back to that burning tanker, and to what it really represents. This was never only about one ship. The vessel itself will be salvaged or lost, the fire will be logged, the crew went home. What the strike did was reintroduce a single word back into the mind of every ship owner on the planet: uncertainty. For a few weeks, captains had started running the strait again. Traffic was creeping back. Insurers were letting their guard down. And then, in one night, 3 tankers hit, and every one of those calculations resets. War risk insurance is the quiet killer here, the premiums that a ship pays just to be covered crossing a dangerous stretch. Earlier in this war, those rates blew out to levels that added hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cost of a single passage. When that happens, some owners simply stop going. And when enough of them stop, the strait effectively closes itself without a single mine being laid, purely because the math no longer works. That's the mechanism that turns one burning tanker into a global supply shock. Not the fire, the fear that follows it. And before anyone tells you there's an easy way around it, look at the map. Yes, there are pipelines built precisely to dodge this strait. The Saudis can push crude west to the Red Sea. The Emiratis can route it out to the Gulf of Oman. And both have been leaning on those lines since the spring. The problem is capacity. Add every bypass route together and you're talking somewhere around 9 million barrels a day of relief. The strait itself carries roughly 20. You cannot pour 20 barrels through a 9-barrel pipe. And the Red Sea escape valve comes with its own hazard, because that route runs straight past the Houthis, who have spent the last couple of years demonstrating exactly what they think of tankers passing their coastline. So the reassuring line, "Don't worry, they'll just go around," dies on contact with the arithmetic. There is no around. There is only through, and through is on fire. So where does that leave us tonight? We have a ceasefire the American president has declared dead. We have more than 80 U.S. strikes inside Iran, answered by an Iranian claim of 85 strikes on American bases. We have an oil waiver revoked, cutting Tehran off from the money it fought a war to get back. We have a new supreme leader, barely in the chair, whose government is projecting readiness rather than retreat. We have a president threatening to escalate to Iran's power and water infrastructure, the kind of target that, if he ever follows through, stops being a message and becomes a siege. And we have an oil market that spent weeks convincing itself the danger had passed, now watching that conviction evaporate $8 a barrel at a time. And underneath all of it, the strait keeps carrying a fifth of the world's energy through a lane you could see across on a clear day. Here's what I keep circling back to. The framing that Iran got scared and folded was comforting, because a scared enemy is a predictable one. You push, they retreat, it's over. But that's not the country that just answered 80 American strikes with a barrage of its own and told the world it's ready for the next round. A frightened adversary steps back. This one stepped forward. And a confrontation between two sides who have both decided that flinching is the greater danger is precisely the kind that doesn't burn out on its own. It burns until the price of continuing becomes unbearable for one of them. And right now, with an American president who profits politically from calm but keeps choosing escalation, and an Iranian leadership that needs the oil money but keeps lighting the fuse, neither one has hit that limit yet. So the real question isn't whether Tehran panicked. It didn't. The real question is which one of these two governments discovers, first, that it can't actually afford the war it keeps threatening, and whether the rest of us find out what that costs at the pump before they figure it out at the negotiating table. This is Professor Alex. I'll see you in the next one.